Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to delve into unit and UI testing, and we've got Mats and Nikolai from Bryntum live from Stockholm. Myself and Bill are here in San Francisco, so it's kind of an international call going on this morning. Mats is going to demonstrate how you can use Siesta to write unit and UI tests in plain JavaScript and execute those tests on Sauce Labs. So this is very much a hands-on demo of how to use these tools and hopefully how to use best practices to get your testing done. To get things started, we do have a small poll here that we'd like to execute to have you guys respond on which kinds of testing tools you're using. So if you could answer those questions for a few seconds, we'll use that to help us steer some of the content in the webinar this morning. Please submit any questions you have in the Q&A box, which should be in the lower right-hand side of your panel. We'll get to these questions towards the end of the webinar this morning. Usually we save about 10 or 15 minutes so we can answer and have an interactive session with our attendees. Again, we are recording the session today. Once that recording is ready, you'll receive an email with the links to the recording and the slides, and we encourage you to share these with your colleagues who were not able to attend and listen to this event live. All right, with that and the poll getting going on, I will pass it over you to Matt and Nikolai to get started.
All right. Hello, everybody. And welcome to this webinar where I'll introduce you to unit testing and UI testing of your XJS applications using our Siesta tool. So first up, shortly about me. I founded the company called Bryntum. I'm based out of Sweden in Stockholm. And to introduce you to my team that I work with, they're really nice colleagues. This is a photo of wearing the really nice Sauce Labs t-shirts that we received. We're a team of hardcore Sencha community members since many years now. And we build powerful Gantt and scheduling charts for the XJS ecosystem. And we also have Kanban boards. Also, of course, as you know, today we're speaking about testing. We will show you the Siesta testing tool we have, and we also have monitoring tools for quality of your websites. And of course, we do some training and consulting on the side as well. And to sum up, we have about 2K clients in over 70 countries right now. And all we do is basically JavaScript components and tools, so fully web-based in our environment. So the agenda for today. We're going to start with just a brief intro of Siesta itself, walk through some of the basic features so you get to know the tool a little bit. We're going to show you how to write good tests and what are some typical traps and mistakes that we can make to write bad tests. We'll definitely want to avoid those. And then I'll show you how to write a basic unit test. And also we have Phantom JS, of course, to help us to run the test inside the IDE. And then moving on to UI tests, which is, of course, a little bit more complex. I'll show you how you can simulate user interactions with Siesta. Also show you how you can interact with Vue and do Vue testing. Also, when you have a lot of tests, after a while, you will definitely want to abstract your test code into a separate test class, so you get some code reuse. We'll also demonstrate that today. And then, of course, life is also a lot about application tests. So we'll go through those thoroughly, show the really nice newly refactored Siesta recorder, and also talk about automation and continuous integration at the end. So this is basically the high level that we'll cover today. So let's get started. Yeah, so the Siesta itself looks like this. You have your test suite, your test list defined on the left side. It's completely web-based. You have the test assertion list in the middle. And if it's a visual test, you see the web content on the right side. So that's pretty much it. It's kind of self-explanatory. So a brief overview. So Siesta is actually unit testing, UI testing, and application testing all in one tool. So it's basically like combining Jasmine and Selenium, all having it in one tool, which is what we set out to do about 5 or 6 years ago when we started developing Siesta. It tests any JavaScript code base. It's not only for XJS. So anything web-based, Siesta will work really nicely. And Siesta itself is web-based, and of course, it comes with full source code, so you can extend it yourself, you can style it, you can add new APIs to it. And also very important is that we're specializing in testing Ext.js, which is a very rich widget library and like a full architecture for building web applications. So we have a special testing layer just for Ext.js. And looking at what features we have for the tests, well, the tests themselves are written in JavaScript, and you can write them in just plain, good old JavaScript style, or you can choose the more popular BDD or behavior-driven development style that you might have seen from Jasmine before. Tests are completely isolated. They run in frames, so you don't have to worry about cleaning up after yourself. Each test will start in a fresh context always. And we also have a very powerful event recorder, which allows you to author tests very quickly instead of hand typing each command that you want to do in your tests. So click here, type there, drag this little bar over there. All that can be just recorded, and then you have a test that's ready to go immediately. We have code coverage, of course, and Siesta is extensible, so you can add your own assertion methods or helper methods to just not have too much boilerplate code inside of your tests. And of course, automation is a very important topic. I guess we all know that. And Siesta will give you reports. You can have HTML, you can have JSON, you can have XML reports. It also integrates easily with the most popular CI tools like t.iit, Jenkins, and a few more. It also integrates with nice cloud testing providers such as SaaS. And we support parallel test execution. So you can tell Siesta to run 20 workers at the same time. And this really cuts down the test suite execution time. So for rapid feedback, this is a must-have feature. So that's a high-level view of what Siesta can do for you. And I suggest we start from the simple part, or the most important part, which is unit tests. And before we start, I would like to just stop and describe a little bit what testing means for us as developers. Because there's many types of tests out there. We have unit tests, we have UI tests, application tests, black box tests, monkey tests, exploratory testing as well. So what do all these terms mean? And if you look at the test pyramid, we advocate that you should start investing heavily in your unit tests as a solid foundation, because your unit tests will cover the most important part, the logic that will be reused throughout your application. And then once that's done, you of course also invest in view tests, because we're after all writing web applications, so there will be views, and that they have to be tested as well. And of course, we definitely want application tests as well, to do like a full stack test to show that the application as a whole is functional before we release. And in the real world, this is more common as far as we've seen ourselves, that typically companies will invest really heavily in backend unit tests, database tests, and so on. And then the JavaScript unit test will be an afterthought. But of course, there will be some application tests maybe covering the most common scenarios. So there's definitely room for improvements in the community out there. So a unit test should focus only on a single JavaScript class, as we call it. That would be the unit. It should not involve any DOM, and it should be just pure logic, like math library, date manipulation, financial calculation, and so on. And since it's just logic, it means that the tests will run very, very fast. And these very, very fast tests is a very nice thing to run inside of your pre-commit hook to make sure that your Git repo or your SVN repo stays functional, and you're not by mistake slowing your team down with some dirty code. So in Siesta, this is the most simple unit test you could write. You create some type of component or something, and you have a before each hook, which iterates, or which is called before each section is executed. And then you see inside of the it section, we see a expectation of this component get width. And then this is basically as simple as it gets. If you've written Jasmine test before, the notation should look quite familiar for you. And the t variable is the test instance itself. And then once your tests start to grow, you break it up into these nice subsections called subtests, and you can debug them very easily by having an extra I for inclusion. So if you see in this slide, only the second section with t.iit will actually execute. All the other sections will be skipped. And this is really nice when you're trying to face some bug or investigate a single failing test where you don't want other test code to execute because you want to deep dive and isolate just one test section. And really, unit tests are your friend. And as I said before, they should be your #1 priority. So start by covering your most important JavaScript classes, code that is very much reused, maybe your classes, your model code, etc. And run these tests as often as you need. And before commit, you can run them daily, you can run them nightly, and you get really rapid results, which is a very good feeling to have as you're developing. And if you can, use the test-driven development approach. Write your tests first, code after, and then use the BDD style that I showed to make sure that your tests are readable, as readable as possible. And for those of you who haven't experienced TDD before, I'll just remind you that these 4 steps is what TDD is all about. So we start with a red test before we even think of the implementation. So we'll start with some empty stub, and then we run the test. We should have a failing test. And then we do the implementation, rerun the test, and hopefully now the test passes. And we can refactor the code and know that the test is doing what it should. And then you just repeat this cycle. And when you get really into this flow, it's a super nice feeling because you become very, very productive. And the code has a much greater chance of working on the first run because you basically thought about the implementation twice. So I'll now switch over to code mode in my WebStorm IDE to show a simple test that I wrote. I'm going to test a user model. So this is an employee class. It has some attributes, first name, last name, monthly salary. And then I've added a method that's called getAnnualSalary. And I expect this to be 12 times the monthly salary. So if I run this in my Siesta, we'll see this. Well, there's nothing in the right panel because this is not a DOM test. This is just a unit test. And we see that it's nice and red. So we got undefined. We expect it to be 12 or 120K. So we go back and look at the employee class. You see that it's empty. There's no implementation in this getAnnualSalary. So the test is red, which is expected. And then I'll go ahead and cheat and just implement it, so to speak. And we go back to Siesta UI, run it again. And then we say, damn you, Chrome cache, for getting in my way on such a nice presentation. And then the test is green. And then, of course, we don't want to do too much of this, swapping between code editor and Siesta. So I will, of course, want to stay inside of my WebStorm here. And I can do that because we have Phantom.js integration into WebStorm or Eclipse or any other IDE, Visual Studio. So you can see here that the test is now run inside of my IDE. I have it wired up to a key command, and it just runs for me immediately, and I don't have to switch to Chrome because there's really not much to do in Chrome because there's nothing to see, there's nothing visual. I would only be here if I needed to debug the test and step into breakpoints and so on. So that's basically the most simple TDD flow in Siesta. And you notice everything here is just pure, simple JavaScript. We have the nice it sections. I can tell Siesta, I just want this section. I can exclude it if this is something that's still in progress or should be temporarily disabled. And this before each hook is executed, before every it is executed, to make sure that we have a fresh context here, a fresh employee variable to work with. And then that's basically how you carry on. Now, if you want to build some new method, you just write some other method like that, and then you would run the test and then actually do the implementation. So yeah, really nice flow when you get into the whole t.iit mindset. So let's go back to the presentation. And then, since you can write your test anyway, there's a lot of wrong paths you can take. So I'll try to highlight a few good paths you can take and some good tips and tricks. And in general, we definitely advise you to treat your test code as your own application code. So the same code standards should apply. It should be properly indented. It should just look nice and be written as if it was something that mattered a lot, because it does. You should document it well. Don't write too many magic numbers or strange constructs that look brilliant to you, but remember that it has to be readable to you, to the next guy in your team. And also try to keep tests simple. So favor test readability over the DRY principle. So it's probably better to have the test a little bit larger, but more readable, instead of trying to overcomplicate it and create helper methods and so on inside of your test. So you write it once, but you probably read it many times as you debug it. And then as your test suite grows, definitely abstract your test code and break it out into your own helper methods that you can call a lot inside of your test code. Otherwise, the tests become too large, and there's just too much percentage of boilerplate test code inside your test. And then, of course, like I showed you, definitely you should break your tests into smaller sections. This will allow you to much easier debug and read and parse and structure, and this just scales so much more than if you wrote everything in line on separate lines. So this is definitely our favorite approach, to have a large test spec written in expressed in multiple smaller specs like this. And of course, what we all want to do is to minimize test maintenance as well. Something that's very demoralizing for the team, and this is something we have experienced a lot ourselves. It's flaky tests that fail on a Monday, and then Tuesday they're all fine, and they can be on and off all the time, but you really don't know why. It's very, very bad for the team morale. And usually this is caused by bad tests or just race conditions in the test code or in the application code. Maybe you use some third-party framework which is using set timeouts or set interval, which is not clear. And debugging these tests, it takes a lot of time and effort, and it's not a good feeling when you're stuck in this mode. So we definitely want to avoid the test maintenance as much as possible. So a few things to consider here. Never have hard-coded waits. So if you're clicking some button in your test, which triggers a load of some data into a grid or a table, then you might think to yourself, yeah, of course, that's going to take some time. So let's add 2 seconds or 10 seconds to give it a chance to load. But then, of course, you've added a race condition, because your server might be under heavy load when it's running in a test farm somewhere. So it might not be enough. It might be okay in your local host, but in the real world, in a test farm, it might not. So this test could pass maybe even like 99% of the time, but it is a hidden race condition, which you should always avoid. And what you should do instead is always wait for the condition. So maybe you wait for some CSS selector, you wait for some property, or you can wait for a function, so you can wait for anything. In this case, I can just wait for some grid to contain more than 0 in it, and then do the assertions after. Now the race condition is gone. And this is really important. And also, tests should be independent. They should not rely on the execution order. It should always produce the same result regardless of when it was executed. And when you do run your test suite in automation mode, we do not guarantee the test order, which is actually good, because that will actually prove to you if your tests are nicely encapsulated and independent. So moving on, we covered unit testing. Now let's move on to UI testing. So when I say UI testing, I typically mean one of two things. Either a UI unit test, testing a single UI component. If you write a large web application these days, it will definitely be broken down into smaller parts, smaller puzzle pieces that are combined to what is the full application. So we should, of course, be able to test those views separately. That's what I would call a UI unit test. Of course, you could also say that application test is a UI test because it's by definition engaging the view. But that's, of course, a completely different test because then you're just visiting a URL and you issue commands to that environment. And these UI tests, they, of course, it takes time to make them. That's a given. So you have to take that into account. It's not as easy as writing a unit test. And UI tests are also more fragile. They run slower than unit tests because the DOM is involved. So we have to wait for things to render. There could be more race conditions, etc. And for XJS applications, when you're doing these view tests, understanding CSS and the XJS component query is really important. And a benefit of doing this kind of testing is that it's very easy for you to detect tight coupling between your components. So if you're trying to test a user list in isolation, because you want to, of course, be able to reuse your views in multiple places in your application, it could crash if there's a hard dependency to another class, which shouldn't be there. But having these type of tests is a very good sanity check. Because it will just crash immediately if it can't resolve these dependencies. So a quick basic show of a Siesta UI test looks like this. If you want to issue some commands to the Siesta UI, to the test subject, you'll just say t.chain, which is our asynchronous chain in which you have commands that tell Siesta what to do. So this reads very easily, and that's intentional. So we can say click, we can type Bob's name, and then tab it to the password field. And then we type the password, and then we click some button, which contains the login text. And then we wait for some selector, some CSS selector to be not present. And this would be a naive way of testing that the login window works. So it's quite self-explanatory. Now we'll switch over to demo mode again, and I'll show you our unit tests, a UI unit test. And if I run this UI unit test, you'll see a view show up here. This is a visual test. I can open the test code. And you can see here that we create some login window, and then we do some assertions based on that login window that we expect some CSS class to exist. If I remove that CSS class, I expect it not to exist. If I add it back, it should be there. If I destroy the window, it should not be there at all. So we do a not OK, which checks for falsy. And then we check the size API. We create a window again, and then just line up expectations like this, get width, get height, resize the window, and check again. And again, this is not an application test. This is just testing one view, which is our login window. And now that we see that we can use it, it means it's nicely encapsulated. It can be reused with no strange dependencies. And the login window itself is just a simple XJS class, nothing really special to show here. Name field, password field, and some mock to just fake a login. And then, of course, we can also interact with it, because now we just check the API, or we can actually click and type into it. And you see that it's doing what we wanted. And if you look at the code this time, you'll see the same login window that we had before. It's created, instantiated like this. And then you see something interesting here. In my chain, I have just put a login command with an array with arguments. And this is about our own test class, which I have added to this example. So I mentioned earlier that it's very important to be able to abstract code that should be reused. So maybe in a lot of your tests for your application, you'll want to log in first. Then it would be a nice idea to have this code encapsulated here. So I've just put a login method here, which accepts user, name, password, callback. And then I do the actions here, and then call the callback at the end in our chain. So if this shows up a lot in your tests, they will be very, very small. So you'll see it just says login, and then you put some name and some password, instead of having to repeat all these actions in maybe 50 tests. So then, of course, you can continue building here and adding your own assertions and whatever you can think about, and you can have multiple of these helpers. So Siesta is built to be completely extensible, and that's really a nice feature. All right, so let's go back to the slides. And then, of course, since UI tests are a little bit more complex, we'll want to make sure they're stable. So when you test dynamic DOM applications, which is basically always the case these days, unless you write static HTML websites, of course, but for frameworks like XJS or Angular, there's a lot of dynamic DOM. And testing dynamic DOM is, of course, a little bit tricky. And the way we see it, it really has to start with an organization-wide decision that testing has to be prioritized. And notice that that text is in bold, because this is really, really important that everybody is on the same page here. And the code, the UI code, the JavaScript, the CSS, has to be written in a way that facilitates testing, so that you don't realize this after you've deployed the application. So this should be somewhere like week 1 when you start your project. This should be on the roadmap. And the developers should help the testers, depending on who's doing the testing, but there should definitely be smart annotation of the DOM. So there should be like a team-wide decision made, like how are we going to make sure that we can write stable tests. And if we look at a typical complex application these days, you could see that there's a lot of DOM with different types of attributes. So it's hard to know, like, what should I pick? And if we zoom in and look at the DOM from this view, you can see the IDs specifically. And they don't look very stable to me. They basically look like there's some increment, there's some counter somewhere. So if I change some data, or if I reload the page, I cannot trust that these IDs are the same. So you could write one test and it could actually pass, but it would most likely break down after a few iterations or some development of your application. So this is not a good way to do it. And what we want to do instead is that in your company, you will decide to use a custom attribute, like data test ID or data whatever, and then describe the role of the UI component or UI element. And then you will target that instead. And now the test will be more readable. It will be much easier for the people writing the tests, which that might not be the developers themselves. It will be much easier for them to see in the DOM which attributes to choose. And of course, this will stick. So even if you refactor the page and you move the element around, this locator will still be stable. All right, so move on to application tests. So application testing has many names. It can be called black box testing, functional testing, etc. Typically, you'll just go to your application index HTML page, the starting page, and then take it from there. And this essentially runs all the code of your application, which is kind of the opposite of a unit test, which runs just a specific targeted piece of your application. This runs everything, and that's kind of the point, of course. And the real value here is that you know if the application as a whole works or not. And this is, of course, really important to your stakeholders, to your team, to whoever is making the decision or to release or not release. And there's, of course, a few challenges involved here. Before you start your application test, you need to have your database in a specific state that's known. This is much slower, of course, because it's not just pure JavaScript anymore. It's the complete DOM and database and server-side code. So lots of things can happen along the way. Tests can very easily become fragile. There can be race conditions on many places in this stack. and errors will probably be harder to find. But of course, there's still great value to this type of test. But it's good to know the challenges. And one thing to really help you here is using our event recorder, because again, it's super hard to author each click action and type action unless you know the entire DOM structure by heart. So the event recorder that's built into Siesta is really nice for application tests. And what it does is that it records all the user actions like clicks, types, drag drops performed while you record. And this also means that tests can be created by a non-programmer. And at the end of the day, it just ends up saving you a lot of time. And I want to switch over to Siesta again to show you this recorder. So the test subject for my recording will be one of our components, which is kind of a rich scheduling module. And if I want to go ahead and record something here, I'll just click on the recorder icon. One more time, and then click record. And then I can do something here. I can click and drag here, drag this again. And you see on the left side here, we get a generated stack of actions that I made, and I can replay it immediately. And you'll see the page is loading, and then the cursor shows up, and it repeats what I did. And that was done in maybe 5 to 10 seconds. I can ask for the source, copy paste it into my recorder demo, and that's now ready to be done. And you can continue building on this. Probably you would add some assertions here, like something about the new state, that the tasks should be respectable, should be rescheduled to be, etc. So this way you can author pretty complex tests in a matter of seconds, and writing this from scratch would require you to look up into the DOM each time for every target that you wanted to target. So this is, of course, a huge time saver for anyone writing application tests. And then the next, or the last section of tests we have is monkey testing, which is a really nice thing that we support in Siesta. And monkey testing is essentially just random UI testing. So behind the scenes, Siesta will click, drag, type, double click, right click, all over in the UI, completely randomly. And this helps you find unhandled exceptions. And what I love about this, and I'm a really big fan of this concept, is that it's free testing help. It costs us €0. So if you break that down, you take a piece of virtual banana that you should feed the test monkeys. 5 equals 0 is 0. So you're not paying anything for these monkeys to run around while they test your applications during the night. And I'll show you how this looks when you unleash the monkey army. I'll use the same example as here. I'll just close the recorder, we'll make this a little bit smaller, and run the monkey test. And now you'll see the monkey is going loose. It could click, type. You have no idea what it's doing, and that's the whole point. And the cool thing also is, if it finds something, it will dump the entire action log so that you get a replayable test back. So you'll see in your TeamCity or in the CI platform you use exactly what the monkeys did, so you can find this exception and replay it. And this goes on for as long as you tell it to. And the monkey test is very, very simple. So I think this is definitely worth your 5 seconds to invest in this simple test. And you can tell it to go to any page, of course, target any element on the page. Typically, you'll tell it to go all over the place and just say how many monkeys you want. So now it's going to click and type and do things for 20 seconds. And of course, if you have some code breaking your app, it will throw and it will report it to you, so it will fail the test. And this is for me really nice to have as a last defense against bugs. And in our world, speaking from our experience, it actually finds, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 bugs per year for free. And this is bugs that we can then fix before we deploy our next release. And another feature that we have that comes into, that would be of interest in UI and application testing is the screenshot comparison feature, where you can say, I want to compare the entire page against this baseline photo. Or you can go into detail and just say, I want to compare just this section of the page, this element, to a known stable image. That's also very useful because it's really, really hard to capture these, the rendering bugs. You can't really do it with JavaScript or any other tools. You need a visual tool for it. And that's built into Siesta as well. So basically now we covered unit tests, we covered UI tests, application tests, and monkey testing. So once you know all these weapons to write your test suite, it's time to automate your test suite and apply continuous integration. And Siesta ships with multiple test launchers. And Siesta itself is, of course, the test infrastructure, but then launching the tests is done through other tools. So we ourselves mainly use for WebDriver. We also support Phantom JS, which is a WebKit-like runner. There's also Slimer JS, which we support, which as of the latest version requires Firefox to be installed. And then in the latest release, we also added support for XVFB, which is for Linux only. But that basically allows you to do parallel test execution on your local machine. And this is super nice if you want to have rapid feedback to split your test suite on like 5 or 10 workers. It gives you really nice results. And to explain for anyone who hasn't worked with continuous integration, the purpose of it is to have this repetitive feedback that just keeps coming through the day and to the night. So you'll have automated builds that are triggered on commit or on some timestamp or actions in your system. So typically during the night, you'll have a full suite running in every browser. And this just allows you to find errors so much more early than if you have to run the tests yourself. And this leads to better code quality, and in the end, of course, we as developers will be much more motivated and smiling, which that's a good thing. And when you're in this world of continuous integration, you'll have continuous delivery. And the overall goal is, of course, we're always ready to release, which is, for me, the best feeling in the world as a developer and product owner. And a little bit about our strategy. We use TeamCity by JetBrains. Our test suites are triggered to run in Chrome on every commit, and such a run is completed in less than 5 minutes typically. So we get really, really fast feedback when we push to our Git tree. And then nightly for all the other browsers like Firefox, all the IEs and Safari and so on. And based on that, we get a lot of reports, we get statistics, charts, and code coverage in return. But even if you've taken it this far, it's kind of tricky to run in multiple browsers. That's still an issue. Even if you have a beautiful test suite covering all the scenarios, you need to do cross-browser testing. And this means that you either have to create a virtual machine farm for every version of IE. You have to add Chrome, Safari, Firefox, maybe Opera. So we're talking about a lot of virtual machines, and each of them they have to be maintained. There's Windows Update. There's all kinds of things to worry about and optimize. And we've done this ourselves, so we know. And it's very time consuming, and it just makes you distracted from your core business. And of course, this is where Sauce Labs comes in. So cloud to the rescue. And we partnered with Sauce Labs a few years ago, and we now integrate seamlessly with Sauce Labs, which for you means that you can run tests very, very easily in any operating system, any browser combination. No need to manage your own virtual machine farm. And we blogged about this a few times. And launching your test with Sauce is as easy as typing WebDriver, telling WebDriver where to go, in this case, my local host, Siesta tests, and then adding a special Sauce Labs key, which will then read from your environment file, the username and password that you have for your Sauce Labs account. So I thought I'd show you how easy it is to do that. And this is my command line. I'm telling WebDriver to go to my localhost for our Siesta test suite. I'm adding the Sauce Labs key. I already have a tunnel set up to save some time. I'm telling Sauce Labs to use 5 workers. So basically divide the workload on 5, which will, of course, speed up the execution. And then I want Sauce to choose Windows as my platform. And then, of course, this takes some time, but this is typically something you do in your nightly build. This is not maybe something you do in your continuous daily work, launching this from your web storm. So this startup time is just to connect with Sauce and use that VPN tunnel. And now you see after a few seconds that tests are becoming to stream back. We're getting the results we want. And that's how easy it is. And you can specify any Windows version, any Chrome version, any Firefox version to make sure that you test what you want to test, what your users will be using. We'll go ahead and close that now, like that. So that's really brilliant in my mind. It's just so simple and you don't have to worry at all about configuring the virtual machines. So what basically happens is that Siesta splits up your test suite into chunks and then feeds them off into Sauce Labs in these chunks, so that Sauce Labs will process the tests in these separate chunks using the workers. So you get very rapid results compared to running everything in a sequential one worker scenario. So parallelizing is really a key for rapid feedback. And we can, of course, do 20 workers, 5 workers, 10 workers. That all comes down to what kind of account you have and the amount of testing time you have. But this is really, really nice to have as a developer and as a tester. So that's basically all I wanted to cover today. And I wanted to sum up. So prioritize your JavaScript unit tests. That's where your testing efforts should begin. Don't forget UI tests. Don't go straight to application tests, but test your views in isolation. Make sure that they can be reused in multiple pages, maybe even in multiple applications. If they're written correctly, you get that nice extra reuse benefit. Of course, you always need application tests because that's what will eventually tell you if you can release or not release, if the application works. And also, I really suggest that you look into monkey testing because it will find bugs for free, I promise. No effort spent. And then once you have your test suite, you of course have to choose a continuous integration strategy, choose some tool like t.iit or Jenkins, and then automate. Of course, that's where the big win happens because then you don't have to launch the test yourself. You just sit back and focus on your work as the test data comes continuously delivered to you by your continuous integration environment. And a few links to leave you with here. If you want to learn more about Siesta and what it can do for you, go to our website, bryntum.com/product/Siesta. We have a blog, and you can also check our t.iit site ourselves. We put it out in the public so you can see our test execution and see all our results the way we do it. And of course, saucelabs.com for more information. And the slides from today's presentation are already available. So just go to speakerdeck.com/Mats. And final plug for SenchaCon, which is coming up in Las Vegas in 2 weeks, I believe, November 7. Bryntum will be there, Sauce Labs will be there. We're both sponsoring the conference. So head on to senchacon.com and register right now. There's still slots available. And with that, I would like to hand over or open up for questions, if there is any.
Hey, Mats, that was fantastic. Really great overview of how to do the process and good focus on the code there. There's a question here about DOMs that says, how do you test applications with a strong client-side JavaScript contribution, including significant population and modification of the DOM using Siesta?
Well, so basically I think I mentioned that in one of the slides, that it's all about deciding in your team, in your organization, that testing has to be prioritized. So you have to decide during the development stage, like how your DOM should look, how it should be annotated, so that whoever writes the test can do it in a nice, reliable way, so that you never end up using unstable selectors like IDs that can be changing from time to time. So you need these stable interaction points, and that's basically how you attack it, regardless of which JavaScript framework you're using, if it's XJS, Angular, or whichever.
Great, that's great advice. And I really like the monkey testing application you have there. Is that something you have to program, or is that just truly random? You pick it and say monkey test, and then it randomly goes through and does tests on those particular segments?
That's correct. All I typed was t.monkey test. I don't have to do anything else, and then you tell it to go to a website. So you point it to a website URL and then say t.monkey test and how many monkeys you want.
No, that's a great utility. Fantastic. We're not getting more questions, so I think that pretty much does it for today. I'd like to thank the audience for joining with us and sticking with us today. We'll be posting the recording and the slides on Sauce Labs and our blogs later this week. And if you're going again to SenchaCon, be sure to stop by our booth. We'll have lots of experts there that you can talk to and ask questions about our technologies in person. So from Sauce Labs and Bryntum, I want to thank you very much for attending, and this concludes today's webinar.